Thanksgiving time, the super committee was charged with reducing $1.2 trillion out of our 10-year budget plan. 1.2 trillion is a huge number, but it represents barely 3% of the planned spending for the next 10 years. They couldn't find a way over 10 years to reduce 10%. Now, most Hoosier families could do it in 1 year. In fact, over the last 3 or 4 years, most families have done it. Well, I started looking at the budget and decided, you know, they can't find 1.3 trillion. I'm going to put my own budget plan together. And I've spent several days, and I will admit my mechanism for doing it. Can you hear okay? Yeah. Okay. My mechanism for doing it is pretty rudimentary compared to all the complex budget tools of the United States government and the Congressional Budget Office. But I started with the CBO reports and went through and laid out my own plan over the next 10 years, and frankly had fun doing it. I kind of geek out on such things. And I laid out this 10-year budget plan, and we started on a tour around the state. And I was amazed. I would walk into newspaper offices, and people would look at me and say, okay, whose plan is this? Well, it's my plan. Well, where'd you get the numbers? Well, I started with the congressional budget, and then I worked across. But whose plan? It's my plan. You know, these reporters, TV journalists were astounded that the state treasurer knew how to do this stuff. I found it amazing. But in my 10-year plan, I actually reduced $7.6 trillion over the next 10 years. And I started by eliminating the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Shut them down, move on, and frankly, for those several agencies like the Commerce Department, which is charged with doing a constitutional function once every 10 years doing a census, you know, we can move that into some other part of government to make sure once every 10 years it takes place. It doesn't need to be a full-time, every year bureaucracy. You know, we see agencies like education and energy that were given a mission, and by all accounts, they've totally failed in their mission. You know, one thing, and I'm going a little bit aside, but bear with me, it is a budget issue in the end. You know, I believe any agency, any department of the federal government, and every regulation ought to have a sunset to it. Amen. Because at some point, somebody ought to say, is this group meeting its goals? And if not, sorry. If it's not important, get rid of it. But if they've been given a mission and they're not succeeding at the mission, it's time to either bring new people in who can do it, or say, we're not going to do that. And every one of those missions should be judged against that all-important measuring stick, which is, of course, the Constitution of the United States. Yes. The budget that I put forward, and here's the scary part, is drastic. I mean, I started out with the goal of saying, let's reduce this budget so we can begin to get our national debt and deficit under control. I wanted to get to the point as quickly as possible where we could have a balanced budget. And even in my projections, really pushing hard, you get there in about 2018. Now that scares me, frankly. Not about the way I looked at the budget, but how big the budget is and the deficit is. Now, Paul Ryan recently released a plan, which I think is a good start in some areas, but he doesn't even balance the budget until 2024. And I think that's very dangerous. We have to do more. You know, in talking of the economy as a whole, understand, with a 15, almost soon to be $16 trillion debt, governments have only 2 ways to pay off debt. Now they can combine the 2 ways, but they've got 2 ways. Either raise taxes, and if we raise taxes, we kill the economy, or print more money. We used to say print money. Technically now it's hit the button, digitize the money. Now it's not there. Next moment it is. You just do it. You can combine those 2, but it's very dangerous. It destroys your economy when you do so. And to the point that Mr. Obama wants to say, let's tax the rich. Let's tax the rich. Understand this. If last year, or actually 2010 now, since we're in this, we just paid our taxes for the last year on record, 2010. If the federal government had taken every penny of every American that earned more than $250,000 once they reached that level, in other words, once you reach $250,000, you made $250,000 that year, the government takes every other penny. If the government confiscated all of that money, they would have taken in an additional $280 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? Today, yesterday, tomorrow, each day, we are spending $4 billion more than we take in. So if we had that additional $280 billion, and we started the tax year doing nothing different, for 70 days, we would be living within our means. And on the 71st day, about March 12th, we would start all over again, borrowing another $4 billion every day. That's why this issue, you know, recently the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a military person, was leaving office. His name is Michael Mullen. He was asked, what is the biggest threat to the American security? He didn't say Al-Qaeda. He didn't say Iran. He didn't say nuclear proliferation. He said our national debt. A military man. He gets it. If we do nothing, we are in serious trouble. You know, Mr. Lugar, from the best we can tell, and I may be wrong on this, but I will tell you as we've looked at it, we know he's voted to raise the debt limit 23 times. It appears the one time he voted against it was about 6 weeks ago. And I'm not saying you can never vote to raise the debt limit, but you have to vote to get something in return for that vote, and what we have to get is a cut in spending. We have to roll back the size of government. Mr. Lugar doesn't do it. The Democrats aren't going to do it. And that, again, is my frustration with Republicans. They'll vote the right way, but they won't come back and tell you why we need to make government smaller. And I just told you why. Because when we have a $4 billion a day spending problem, it is not something that we can keep doing and doing and doing. You know, John Adams once said, great nations die on the sword of others or on the mountain of their own debt. There you go.